Johnny, I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Well, thank you as always. I'm really glad to be on today.
Yeah, you think about Nashville, and we were talking about it when you think about the town and the way that you guys have embraced growth. And, I think it was simply amazing. If you go through the town of Nashville, you guys have going to have a great weekend, but it's something to showcase a beautiful town and what you guys have embraced there with that culture, and a lot of fun to visit. I know the Alabama fans are excited to come to your town.
Well, I do hope that the culture that is being portrayed is a little bit more updated than that song, that bumper music coming out of the break.
That's
it's
true.
A little bit more
That's
modern
true.
than that.
A little bit. No, I mean, we're having some fun. We're playing all sorts of classic country, new age country, and this cross between the different music between, it's country is almost touch with a little hip hop, I guess. A little, it's a little faster beat, I guess, than what we're accustomed to. But we're playing it all this week.
Well, I will say this, it's one of these things where if you're watching social media, I mean, the Alabama fans not really giving Vanderbilt much of a chance. Like, who have you played? It's Kansas State, big deal. Let me just, fair warning, of course, I grew up a Bama fan, so very familiar, obviously, with the Bama history. And let me just take you back a little road trip to 1980. Alabama, the reigning national champs in 78 and 79, riding a 28-game winning streak, taking on Mississippi State down in Starkville, a unranked Mississippi State team, I might add. And, oh, by the way, that 28-game winning streak came to an end later in the afternoon as Mississippi State won 6-3. So better be careful if you're the fans, if you're students telling the players how great they are. Because you always go, well, Coach Saban and the staff will have the players, they'll listen. But here's the thing. If that's true, then no Alabama player would ever find themselves in trouble, because after practice, players are constantly reminded, don't do anything to embarrass yourself, your family, your teammates, the university. Do they all listen? No. And so I'm just fair warning here. Plus, it's a long season. And it's one thing when you're thinking about getting yourself up for taking care of business against Tennessee, or if you're facing Georgia, or like in the case of the first game this year, taking on a Florida State team with a battle of the two teams in the top three. It's one thing to say, hey, we have to be ready. This is a different Vanderbilt team. But, Vanderbilt, is paying attention and watching. And if this Vanderbilt team is taken for granted, it could be a very long afternoon for Alabama.
Let me ask you, when you look at Vanderbilt, give me the strong point, the strong unit of this team that will have to bring their big A game to beat Alabama on Saturday. What unit are you looking at?
Well, it starts with the defense, obviously. We're talking about the number one defense in the country as far as total defense, passing defense, scoring defense. But it's also important for Vanderbilt, Kyle Shermer, who has certainly grown up a lot on the field over the past year plus, as far as after a sluggish start early on in 2016, he's making better and smarter decisions. And, this is, we've seen the stat and seen the record. Alabama under Nick Saban, when he takes on a team with the number one rated passing efficiency quarterback in the conference, 1-4. And, oh, by the way, Kyle Shermer, he takes care of the football. So it's fair warning just to, I'm trying to give these signs because Alabama, not used to losing when ranked number one, only 3 losses in the regular season when ranked number one. But just giving, the Alabama faithful fair warning that this is not your grandfather's, this is not your father's Vanderbilt. It's a team that can be very dangerous coming up on Saturday.
Let me go to a couple of guys that you think, when we identify guys on the defensive side of the football, give me a couple of names that Alabama fans need to know about.
Well, to me, obviously, I think it starts with, Oren Burks. Last year, of course, Zach Cunningham, all-conference player, now making a living in the NFL. But when you look at what Vanderbilt's trying to do, I think it starts with Oren Burks. But to me, it's not really individuals per se. It's the fact that this defense plays well as a unit, a total unit. It's all 11 knowing what each other is going to do, and they're playing together. We're not talking about, superstars. It's just a unit under Derek Mason, who, by the way, besides being head coach, he oversees the defense, and he has them playing well as a team. It's almost like the way we look at offensive line unit. Only time you're pointing them out is if they're getting illegal procedure calls or holding calls. Otherwise, if they're just taking care of business, you're talking about the skilled players. I think that's the best way to sum up this defense on Vanderbilt's squad.
Let me ask you where Vanderbilt could grow the most on that offensive side of the football. It seems like they want to get that rushing attack cranked up and to take some pressure off Kyle Schumer. Talk about Ralph Webb and to be able to get that rushing attack cranked up.
Well, Ralph Webb, certainly, is flirting with the 4,000-yard career mark. Only 7 players in the history of the SEC have been able to get to that plateau. Ralph Webb certainly has that opportunity this year, along with Nick Chubb with the Georgia Bulldogs. But we're talking about someone who has amassed almost 3,500 yards on the ground in his career. He's a senior. He's 5'10", 202. But there's also Kari Blasingame as well, is with regards to the running attack. But here's the thing: Kyle Schumer has some weapons. He's got Trent Sherfield as far as being able to throw to, C.J. Duncan, Kalijah Lipscomb, and so the recipe for Vanderbilt or for anybody, if they want to take advantage of the defense of Alabama, they have to be patient and take whatever Alabama is willing to give them. You saw at times Colorado State was able to enjoy some success as far as moving the ball. You just have to be, especially with that secondary, when you've got Minka Fitzpatrick and everybody else in the secondary, you can't get greedy. You just got to be patient. And the biggest thing is you have to be able to frustrate Alabama, make it a very dull, boring game. Kansas State last week, it was 7-0 Vanderbilt after the first quarter. It was 7-7 at halftime, 7-7 after the third. And then, bam, Vanderbilt took the lead in the fourth and went on to win 14-7 over the 18th-ranked Kansas State squad. Couple of things, by the way. As far as Vanderbilt is concerned, there's so many things from a historic standpoint about this matchup Saturday. Vanderbilt 0-7 in the history of the program since that they've been doing rankings since 1936. 0-7 against number 1 ranked teams. 0-50 against top 5 teams. But get this, they've got the last 2 times they faced a top 25 opponent. They beat Tennessee last year. They beat Kansas State last week. This team has never won 3 consecutive games against opponents that were ranked in the top 25. All of those things you could go check if Vanderbilt somehow can find themselves on the winning side on Saturday.
Johnny, when we go out to the experts in the desert, we like to better know that as a.k.a. Las Vegas. They've got it at 19.5 points. I'm just curious if you think that is a fair number.
Oh, I think it's a ridiculous number, and that's just a number, once again, where Vegas just it's not like Vegas thinks that Vanderbilt is 19, whether it's 18.5, 19, or 19.5, that they feel that Vanderbilt is that much worse or inferior to Alabama. They just feel like, they want the money half on one side, half on the other. Nick Saban and that coaching staff, they're not buying into the fact that they're 19 points better than Vanderbilt. And once again, if Vanderbilt shows up, the team that I saw, wrapping up last year with wins over Ole Miss and Tennessee, and the team that's gotten off to this start this year at 3-0. If they show up, the most important thing for Vanderbilt, you look at when Alabama and Nick Saban's teams have lost, especially as a number 1 team. It's important those first 15 minutes. And here's the thing where it helps in Vanderbilt's case. They've outscored their opponents 35-0 in the first quarter. Teams that have won in the regular season against Alabama when they're ranked number 1 under Nick Saban, they've had the lead after the first 15 minutes. And then as the game progresses, Vanderbilt needs to make this a 15-minute ball game. In the 3 losses in the regular season when Alabama was number 1, opponents either had the lead or they were tied going into the final stanza.
We're talking to Johnny Franks right now, who does radio there in Nashville, Tennessee, as we continue our conversation. Johnny, let me go to this game here just for a couple of minutes, and let's look at it from an Alabama perspective. When you look at the Crimson Tide, what do you see different? Do you see this team being vulnerable?
I think they are vulnerable, and I know they're getting healthier per se as far as on defense. Certainly, this team doesn't look like they did on paper going into Florida State, for example. And look, we've seen teams when you when you send as many players to the next level, especially if you're talking about early enrollees per se, as far as going out and and giving up their final year of eligibility, they're just. I mean, yes, I understand Alabama keeps bringing in the talent year in and year out. But eventually, it can catch up with you. And for some reason, early on, if you're going to get Alabama, just like we saw back with the loss to Ole Miss in 2015, and even the loss in that first week of October in 2014 to Ole Miss, if you're going to get them, you need to get Alabama early, because as the season progresses, they start rolling. And usually when you're talking about Alabama losing, it's either in a postseason matchup or a bowl game, Oklahoma, Utah, in games where you can't get the players' interest on the same side.
Hey, Johnny, we'll go to the prediction, maybe the final question, but let me ask you about the state of the SEC. Right now, how do you see it from your perspective there in Nashville as you look across the SEC?
Alabama, obviously, the number one team in the SEC, but as far as number two is concerned, I was really high on South Carolina until they lost to Kentucky last week. I think the East is wide open with Georgia, Kentucky, South Carolina. I'm not buying into Florida, and I think Florida's streak of 30 straight wins over Kentucky falls to the wayside coming up on Saturday night in Lexington. They are so fired up at Kentucky. But, at this point, it's a battle for number two. Certainly, if you're looking at LSU and Auburn, disappointed where they are right now with their programs. Mississippi State, a very impressive win last week against LSU. Is that a sign that Mississippi State is a very solid football team, or also a sign that LSU maybe not there yet? The season will play out and we'll get better. We'll know more after this Saturday, because Mississippi State has to go to Georgia. Florida has to go to Kentucky. And so we'll have a better idea where we stand with the SEC after this weekend.
Johnny, you had a stat, and I know you've given us a bunch of stats, and I'm a stat guy too, but have we missed the one that you come up with? I know you sent me a text about unranked teams bagging the big one. Maybe I'll ask you for your prediction and give me some of those stats that, even if you've already said it, recap a little bit.
Yeah, I'm going back. Look, it's not that number one teams haven't lost to ranked opponents, but if you're a team, if you're a coach trying to let your players believe, it's one thing when you talk about, say, a 16 seed beating a number one seed in March Madness, because that's never been done. But to get somebody to believe, all you have to do is show them history that has been done, that something has occurred in the past. Since 1970, 22 unranked teams have brought down number one teams. And look, this list, when you think about great football programs, it is strong. Alabama, Michigan, Southern Cal, Nebraska, Ohio State, Oklahoma. But the bigger ones, too, I look at the ones that have occurred, say, since 2007. Teams that were these were underdog teams. Remember when Stanford, a 41-point underdog, beat a number one USC team in 2007? But other teams that were heavy underdogs, 29, 25 points, 28.5 points, 15 points. And so if you use those stats, you can certainly, especially if a team that believes in itself, and then also know that, look, this has occurred more often than not as far as, thinking about, once in a lifetime. Like a total eclipse, that might be once in your lifetime situation depending on your age. As far as unranked teams beating number ones, it has occurred more times than these top programs would have liked to have seen occurred.
Johnny, should Alabama even load the buses to go to Vanderbilt? I mean, I'm just having some fun here.
We're still talking Alabama here,
okay,
all right?
Okay, all right. I'm just double checking, man. I mean, I'm getting text messages and tweets and direct messages. Man, this guy's got me scared. I'm just saying. We even had one direct message who said, "You need to play this interview to the team." And I'm like, what do you think? Nick Saban's going to let a media guy talk to his team? But I mean, you fired us up about Vanderbilt. I mean, what's your prediction?
Here's the thing. I think it's going to be one of those, and based on the way Vanderbilt has played, only one game dating back to the start of last season that Vanderbilt was out of it. That was losing to Georgia Tech 38-7. Vanderbilt, since the start of last year, they're in every game. I will give the exception with the bowl game last year against North Carolina State. Bowl games sometimes, like I said, you don't know what what version of your team is going to show up. But as far as regular season, Alabama should be concerned. If we're talking about a game that's all of a sudden a one-half contest where it's one-score difference going into the third quarter, you start thinking about all of a sudden you feeling the pressure in those moments. And here's the thing, Vanderbilt has not been there. Alabama has, and you would think that leadership and that experience for Alabama would get them the necessary plays they need, especially in the fourth quarter, to pull out a game. Alabama, my prediction is this. I'm not quite the crazy person yet to say Vanderbilt's going to win this game outright on Saturday. I will say this. If Vanderbilt plays their game, then Alabama, at the end of the afternoon, will know they've been in a ball game.
That's fair enough. Johnny Ballpark Franks, you can connect with him, BP Franks Show, and you can also listen. It is WNSR 95.9 there in Nashville, 560 AM, does an afternoon program, and certainly dialed in with everything happening there in that great town of Nashville, Tennessee. Hey, Johnny, thank you again for spending some time with us, even though, now you got to remember, we've sort of been hitting the panic button all weekend here. And now you just sort of made us go off the cliff. Thanks a lot, Johnny. We appreciate it, man. I mean, you have Alabama fans that I've been trying to coach them off the cliff, and now you just come in and sort of pushed them off the cliff.
Hey, I think it's the smartest thing for the Alabama fans to just stop with the patting on the back and let the coaches do their job.